Okay, so this is the Josephus. You know, you brothers know this. Let's go to page 898. Which is it's gonna tell you about the count. Book 9. I mean, it's like a book 6, chapter 9, and the paragraph 3. It says, now the number of those that were carried captive during this whole war was collected to be 97,000, as was the number of those that perished during the whole siege, 1100,000. Alright, so the war is talking about the Jewish rebellion. During 70, it really started at 66 AD, I believe, and it ended about like 73. You know. Let's go into this book now. Let's go into Septimius Severus. You know, that's just some info of how Jake was up in the Roman Empire, but now let's go how he took it over. This is called Dark History of the Roman Emperors, from Julius Caesar to the Fall of Rome, by Michael Kerrigan. Alright, page 185. Go over some history of what was happened. This is what they call it. 193, Rome's year of shame. You see what they call it? They say 193 AD is Rome's year of shame. Why do they call it Rome's year of shame? Because a black man took over. That's why they call it. That's when the head was wounded to death by Septimius Severus. Alright, page 192. It says, page 192, 3 generals independently rose up with their troops against the new regime. Claudius Albinus was the governor of Britain, far to the east in Syria. Not just his own troops, but also those in Egypt and Asia Minor, had proclaimed Pescennius Niger emperor. Niger means black, so this guy was a Jake, Pescennius Niger. Alright. It says Septimius Severus had been born in Africa, in what is now Tunisia, and like Lucius Quintus, he was the son of a Berber chief. He had enlisted in the Roman army, though, and risen spectacularly through the ranks to his current post as commander in Pannonia, roughly modern Hungary. So it was that on June 1st, 193 AD, Septimius Severus was able to march into Rome with his army without meeting significant resistance. Tells you what happened. It says, acknowledged him as... the Senate, missed one part. So the Senate acknowledged him as emperor. The helpless Julianus was arrested and beheaded. Now, Didius Julianus, what happened was Commodus was killed. Then you had Pertinax got up in there. Didius Julianus smoked him. And Didius Julianus basically paid off the Praetorian Guard. But no one really liked him. So what happened was that Septimius Severus rolled upon him and he killed him and beheaded him. He had been on the throne for just over 2 months, Didius Julianus. The new emperor showed the Praetorian Guard who was boss by abolishing it altogether and executing those who were thought to have led the conspiracy against Pertinax. Septimius Severus created his own elite guard, drawn from his loyal legions, to replace it. You know those are Jakes, man. Like the brothers Karatazar and Arya Ahmad, they were saying, you know, they're gonna get their cousins, their brothers, you know, their best friends. They're gonna get them up in the high ranks, man. So Septimius Severus, he created his own elite guard. He said, "To hell with you, corrupt ass Praetorian Guard. I'm gonna create my own elite guard." You know. It said the fighting was by no means over. Septimius Severus might have been recognized in Rome, but as far as the east was concerned, Pescennius Niger was emperor. Claudius Albinus, meanwhile, controlled a vast segment of Western Europe, including not just Britain, but all of Iberia. Septimius Severus, who even awarded him the imperial title of Caesar, acknowledged his authority in those territories. It was understood that although the African might be emperor for now and for so long as he lived, Claudius Albinus would have the claim to his succession. The two agreed an alliance, as Septimius Severus turned his attention to the east, marching his army out to engage the Eastern Emperor and his legions. They were at Cyzicus, northwest Turkey. Niger's army, now outnumbered, was forced to retreat. Much the same happened a few weeks later at Nicaea, a little further east. In 194 AD, however, Septimius Severus followed through, dealing his rival a crushing defeat at the Battle of Issus. Niger fled to the east, hoping to find sanctuary with Rome's Parthian enemies, but was caught and killed. His severed head was sent back to be exhibited outside the walls of Byzantium. The city had sided with Niger in the recent fighting and still remained defiant. Severus displayed Niger's head as a warning to its occupants of the fate awaiting them. It says, unfazed, they prepared to resist, and Septimius Severus' army settled down for a siege. It was not going to be easy, they knew. Byzantium's situation was superb from the defensive point of view. It was high up on a headland around which fast currents create constant turbulence. Its ports were walled, their entrances controlled by boom chains which could be raised or lowered to admit shipping or to keep it out. Long breakwaters extended out into the sea on either side, on which arches could easily be positioned so that any hostile ships approaching would have to run the gauntlet. The city's fortifications, massive walls with high protruding towers, were said to be the most formidable in the ancient world. Archers standing on these could cover the walls and ramparts at will, showering arrows down upon attackers. At intervals along the walls, moreover, were engines of every kind, including catapults and ballistae. Defenders could lob huge boulders or wooden beams at their attackers, or send heavy bolts hurtling towards them, and often these would be tipped with blazing fire. Ships incautious enough to approach the walls were liable to find themselves hooked like fishes, because hooks were abruptly lowered by pulley systems so that vessels could be yanked out of the water. The Byzantines' own naval strength was considerable. They possessed 500 galleys with hardened bows for ramming the enemy. Many of them had rudders both fore and aft to maximize movement at close quarters. The Byzantines used guerrilla tactics too, sending divers down under cover of darkness. They would dive bolts into the sides of Roman ships and attach long cables. Then, cutting the anchor's chains, they would signal to their comrades on the walls. Again, like anglers, they would reel in their catchers, in short, between the strength of all its various ways. In all its various ways out, they hurled stone sculptures and bronze statues and other things instead. They repaired their increasingly tatty ships with timbers torn from houses. They even replaced frayed ropes with new ones braided from their women's hairs. Alright? And here's an image of Septimius Severus, a black man. Alright? They whitewashed his son, Caracalla. Alright? But here's a black man. You can't tell me that this is a damn cracker. Alright? And here's a sculpture which they busted this up, man. You know? Because you see the dark pigment. This was the dark pigment on him. But what they do, they whitewashed him. And this is going back to that prophecy where the white man is out of the bottomless pit deceiving the nations. You know? Alright? It says good fortune, right? Rome's first African emperor had an Armenian wife. Julia Domna was the daughter of a Syrian priest from Emesa. Septimius Severus was governor in Eastern Gaul when he decided that he simply had to marry her, even though he'd not yet met her and didn't even know her family. What he did know was that everyone was saying that an astrologer had told this girl that one day she was going to be a queen, and that was really all the ambitious Severus needed to know about her. She was still a teenager while he was already a widower in his 40s, but they seemed to have got along together from the start. Ferociously bright and competent, she was also formidably brave and tough, and she went with her husband on many of his campaigns. Later, when he was in power, the empress stayed at home and looked after things while her husband went off to fight enemies and put down rebellions. Rome's traditional elite didn't like it much, but of course neither Severus nor Julian were themselves Roman, and they were unconcerned by patrician disapproval. Alright? It says page 198. It says with the threat, it says winner takes all. With the threat from Pessinus Niger removed, Septimius Severus no longer had any need for his alliance with Claudius Albinus. Immediately after the battle of Issus, he had named his own son Caracalla as his successor. He was surely not surprised when far to the east Albinus's legions reacted by proclaiming their general emperor and started getting ready to move on Rome. Septimius Severus marched his men northwards to intercept Albinus's men. They met near Lugdunum, now Lyon, in central France on February 19th, 197 AD. Severus had been occupied for much of the intervening period dealing with the Byzantines' obstinate resistance, and besides it had taken months for the two contenders for the empire to organize, equip and provision the enormous armies with which they hoped to secure the throne. Fittingly, with such a prize at stake, it was one of the greatest battles of ancient times. As many as 150,000 men are believed to have taken part. The two forces were roughly evenly matched, both in number and determination. The advantage seesawed back and forth as they slugged it out over 2 whole days. Casualties were very heavy on both sides. In the end, though, Severus's cavalry was able to give him the edge, sweeping down into Albinus's exhausted infantry. Their resistance was finally broken and Albinus fled. His cause clearly lost, the would-be emperor threw himself upon his sword so as not to suffer the humiliation of being captured. Cheated of this triumph, Severus ordered that the body be beheaded and then stretched out upon the ground before his watching army. He then rode his horse furiously back and forth over his vanquished rival. He had Albinus's head, along with those of his family, sent to Rome to be displayed on poles as a warning to others, man. This guy was rough as hell, man. You know? Now let's go to this book called The Roman Emperors. Alright. Seen the brother Karatazar brought this book out. A biographical guide to the rulers of Imperial Rome, 318 BC to 476 AD by Michael Grant. Let's go to page 185. Slakia. Slakia 108, page 108. And it says Septimius Severus, 193 to 211 AD. It says Septimius Severus was born in 145 at Lepsis Magna in Tripolitana. His father, Publius Septimius Geta, was obscure but had 2 first cousins who rose high in the Senate. His great-grandfather, who was probably of Punic or Carthaginian extraction, had moved from Lepsis Magna to Italy towards the end of the 1st century AD, rising to knightly rank. And Punic, a long time ago I brought out a video, but Lord